大家好, kumusta? My name is Victor, and today we are going to compare the Fuji XH2S versus the Sony FX30. But let's get started with everyone's favorite, low light testing, and which one is the best. Here is the sample footage. We shot one outside just a balcony, and this is just all ambient lights coming from the buildings, from the street signs, and everything else that you see in here. The Fujifilm, surprisingly, on F-Log2 is cleaner than the FX30. Now, the FX30 is still a great contender, but it is prone to more noise. And honestly, I would pick the XH2S over the FX30 if I'm doing low light shoots, because this is phenomenal. Like the 1250, I thought it would have a lot of noise. Both native ISOs are amazing at it on the Fuji. And then we see that on the FX30, you see the noise, even though we kind of exposed to the right a little bit. But I mean, it's just the nature of the camera. I'm gonna put the Sony FX3 low light capabilities as like good average, and then the XH2S as like above average. Now let's talk about image quality for just daylight shots, and that just kind of like seeing which one is better. Honestly, the F-Log2 and the S-Log3 are both kind of similar in performance, as you can see in the scopes right here. F-Log2 seems like a different workflow compared to S-Log3, because when I put on the F-Log LUTs from Fuji, I had to kind of just add more contrast to it and also add a little bit more saturation to it. I mean, just compared to the Sony, it just becomes more alive right after the conversion. So I did the ETTR, which is exposed to the right method of exposing. Usually that gives you the best footage in terms of APS-C S-Log3. Now, in terms of color, Fuji is a tad greener, or you could say Sony is a tad bit more magenta, and both are easily fixed in post. You can easily match them. But I do like the Fuji greens a lot more than the Sony's, because that's what I've been trying to emulate in my videos. But I feel like if you're comparing these two, both are very similar in performance, and it just will boil down to personal preference. Now let's talk about S-Cinetone versus kind of like a good profile coming from the Fujifilm. I think Classic Chrome is one of the best kind of film simulation from the camera, so that's just what I picked. But compared to both, I do like Cinetone a little bit better because it has more dynamic range, and that I've actually tried the Classic Chrome on dynamic range 200, dynamic range 400, and I don't see any difference between the shadows. It's still a little bit deep, and with the Sony, it's a little bit flatter, and you can grade it a little bit to your liking, and that the saturation is a bit less as well on Sony. Even if I expose it to the right a little bit, it was still not giving me the kind of dynamic range that I'm looking for, and it's still a little bit crushed or contrasty. Overall, straight of the camera footage, S-Cinetone wins for me for now, until I figure out the film simulation, how to make it look the best from Fuji. So watch out for that. We all know that Sony has a really good autofocus system, but the Fujifilm XH2S actually is a good contender in terms of autofocus. Now, it's not great, but it's also not bad. It lies right in the middle, and it has tracking features as well. Now, this is just your typical AF YouTube style of testing, but honestly, I am impressed with what it's capable of. I still have yet to take the XH2S on an actual shoot to really see if it's gonna lock into the right subject, because with Sony, you can kind of rely on it. But then I don't know about the Fuji yet. So again, another day for another test. Now let's move on with image stabilization. Now Sony has two image stabilization settings. One is standard mode, which is gonna utilize your optical stabilization from your lens. And second is the active mode, where it utilizes the IBIS. Now for the Fujifilm, there's three settings. One is standard, second is boosted mode, and third is like tripod mode, which you have to kind of just hold the camera in place and it will make it look like you're on a tripod. Now, I've kind of custom myself with the active stabilization on Sony cameras because I use the FX3, FX30, and the A7 IV. And with practice, you can get really stable shots handheld with the active mode on the Sony IBIS, but on the Fujifilm, it's just a little bit better. All right, let's do the 4K versus 1080 as well between both cameras. Now, there are some things that I've noticed with the Fujifilm XH2S that kind of weirded me out a little bit. Now, the menus and the buttons are a little bit new to me, so that is kind of like, it took some time to really get to know how to use the camera, and I think I need a few more days with the camera so that I get more comfortable with it. But there's one thing that I didn't really like about the Fujifilm, and that is the selection for the codecs. There's so many selections, different bit rates, different formats, file formats, and it just gets super overwhelming which ones to use. But if you're a new Fujifilm user, I've tested the highest bitrate that I could, which was 720 megabits per second, and all the way down to the lowest one. I found when you go around 200 megabits per second, that's like a good medium between good file size and good image quality as well. Because once you go over 200 megabits per second, it kind of has a diminishing return where you keep increasing the file sizes of your footage, while the quality of the footage doesn't really increase that much compared to the size that it gives you. I mean, it's good to have options, but sometimes the selection are very close to each other that it's kind of just pointless to pick one over the other. I hope Fujifilm cleans this up a little bit to kind of just like have an efficient codec, very high quality codec, and then ProRes RAW. Another thing about the Fuji is that I am really wanting to play with the film simulations for video because I've been playing with the film sims on here. And if I can get really good recipes, the film simulation recipes for video, I don't have to grade anymore. It's just like I shoot, cut it, and then it's done. Similar to like an S-Cinetone workflow, where this one is a little bit more customizable. So I'm excited for that. I just want to say that both cameras are very capable no matter which one to pick. You just gotta pick which one is you're more comfortable with or the features that you need between both cameras. Both are gonna perform very, very close to each other, and that it's just up to you which one is your preference. For me, so far, the Sony FX30 wins because I'm a Sony guy. But if I had to start over again, I feel like I'm gonna be more of a Fuji guy than a Sony guy because the options for Fuji is actually a little bit better than the Sony. Just my workflow fits Sony better because it's been ingrained into my professional workflow for years now, ever since like 2016. So it's hard for me to go into another system and be comfortable with it right off the bat. I'm sure I'll just need a little bit more time to get used to the Fujifilm workflow and get really good at it. Again, the XH2S is a very, very capable camera, not to mention the open gate as well. To all of you Fujifilm users, let me know what I can do better testing out the XH2S. I'd love to take it out on an actual shoot and really make it perform the best that it could in terms of image quality and its performance as a whole. And as usual, I'm giving away my Sunset Film Log Pack, and all you have to do to win is comment down below which one would you pick, the Fujifilm XH2S or the Sony FX30. I'd love to know your thoughts. If you want to watch one of my other videos, click on this video right here, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.
너와 나